I don't have time to wait for someone who can't even talk right. Can we just skip her and move on? I've got a lunch reservation at 1. Those words hung in the air of my courtroom like smoke from a fire that should never have been started. I have sat on this bench for many years. I have seen arrogance walk through that door in many forms. I have seen it wearing expensive shoes. I have seen it hiding behind fancy lawyers. I have seen it dressed in a smile that has never once known real struggle. But what I witnessed that Tuesday morning in Providence Municipal Court hit me differently. It hit me somewhere deep, somewhere that doesn't heal quickly. My name is Judge Frank Caprio. This is my courtroom. And in my courtroom, every single person who walks through that door deserves the same dignity, whether they arrive in a limousine or on a city bus, whether they speak with their voice or with their hands. The man who said those words was 26 years old. His name was Preston Aldwell. He stood at the defendant's table in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than some people's monthly rent. His hair was perfectly combed. His watch caught the light every time he moved his wrist, which he did often because he wanted people to notice it. He had the kind of face that had never been told no, not once. You could see it in the way he stood, loose, relaxed, almost bored. Like this courtroom was an inconvenience between breakfast and something better. I looked at him, and I felt something stir in my chest. If you believe that justice should be equal for everyone, no matter who they are or how they communicate, then you're going to want to stay right here, because what happens next in this courtroom is something I will never forget. The bailiff's voice broke through the quiet. Case number 2026 TR 4471, City of Providence versus Preston Aldwell. Charge: reckless vehicle operation resulting in property damage and personal injury. Victim present. Defendant present. I straightened in my chair. I set my glasses on the desk and looked out at the room. The victim's name was Mirabel Osei. She was 41 years old. She worked as a teaching assistant at the Riverside Community Learning Center, helping children with learning differences. She had been doing that job for 14 years. 14 years of showing up early, staying late, and earning a salary that most people in Preston Aldwell's world would call embarrassing. She sat at the opposite table with her court-appointed interpreter, a quiet woman named Delia, who sat close beside her. Mirabel was deaf. She had been deaf since she was 7 years old, after a severe illness took her hearing completely. She communicated through American Sign Language. Her eyes were calm but tired. She had a small bandage above her left eyebrow. Her right wrist was wrapped in a beige support brace. I greeted her first. I spoke clearly and waited as Delia signed my words to her. Mirabel nodded. Her face was composed, but I could see something beneath it. A kind of quiet exhaustion that comes not just from pain, but from having to prove your worth over and over again in a world that doesn't always make room for you. Then I turned to Preston Aldwell. I told him I was glad he was present. I told him we would hear both sides fairly. I told him that in this courtroom, every person is treated with respect. I used the word respect deliberately, and I watched his face when I said it. He gave me a small nod, and the corner of his mouth turned up just slightly. Not a smile exactly. More like the expression someone makes when they're humoring a person they don't take seriously. That was the first warning sign. His lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Theodore Fink, leaned over and whispered something to Preston. Preston listened, then whispered back, and then he laughed, quietly, but loud enough. I asked Mr. Fink if there was something he needed to share with the court. He said, "No, Your Honor, excuse us." I accepted that, for now. What had brought Mirabel Osei into my courtroom that morning was this. 3 weeks earlier, on a Wednesday afternoon, she had been crossing Bellamy Street at the marked pedestrian crossing near the Glenwood Public Library. She was on her way home from work. She was carrying a cloth bag with books in it, books she had borrowed for her students. Preston Aldwell was driving a black luxury SUV, a brand new model, the kind with the cameras built into every angle. He ran the red light at the intersection of Bellamy and 4th Avenue. He was going 41 miles per hour in a 25 zone. His vehicle struck Mirabel on her left side. She was thrown across the sidewalk. The book scattered across the street. She hit the concrete, and her wrist took the impact first, Then her head caught the edge of the curb. She spent one night in the hospital. She missed 4 days of work. She lost income she could not afford to lose. Her wrist injury required physical therapy twice a week for 6 weeks. She paid for her first appointment out of pocket because her insurance had a waiting period. That cost her $210 she did not have. Preston Aldwell, according to the police report, stepped out of his SUV, looked at Mirabel on the ground and said, "Is she okay? Someone call someone." And then he called his own lawyer before he called anyone else. I want you to hold that image for a moment. A woman on the ground, books in the street, a man reaching for his phone to protect himself before he protected her. Now I watched Preston at his table, checking his phone under the desk when he thought I wasn't looking. I cleared my throat and told him quietly that phones were to be placed face down. He looked up, placed it down, then exhaled like I had asked him to carry something heavy. I began with the evidence. My clerk brought up the first item. It was the traffic camera footage from the intersection of Bellamy and 4th Avenue. The video was clear. The light was red. Preston's SUV did not slow down. It moved through that intersection at full speed. The timestamp showed 14 seconds between the light turning red and his vehicle entering the crosswalk. 14 seconds. He had every chance to stop. I asked Preston directly. I said, "Mr. Aldwell, the light was red for 14 seconds before your vehicle entered that crosswalk. Can you explain that to me?" He leaned back. He said, "Your Honor, I was running slightly behind schedule. I made a judgment call. I didn't see anyone crossing. A judgment call." I wrote those words down on my notepad, not because I needed to remember them, but because I wanted him to see me write them. I looked at Mirabel. Delia signed what was being said. Mirabel's jaw tightened slightly, just slightly. She had heard through Delia's hands that the man who knocked her to the ground called it a judgment call. Before I continue, I need you to do something. If this story is pulling at something inside you right now, some sense of right and wrong that you don't want to let go of, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, because what comes next, what this man says in the middle of my courtroom, is something I still think about when I go home at night. I moved to the second piece of evidence. It was a series of text messages retrieved from Preston Aldwell's phone. His own lawyer had submitted them incorrectly, including them in a file meant for something else, and my clerk had flagged them. I am grateful for thorough clerks. The texts were sent the evening after the accident. They were between Preston and a friend whose name appeared in the phone as Dev. The messages read like this. Preston wrote, "Hit some lady crossing the street today. She went down pretty hard, LOL. Lawyer says it'll disappear. These people never have money to fight." Dev responded, "Bro, you good?" Preston wrote back, "Obviously, I've got Fink. These things vanish." I read those messages aloud. Every word, slowly. The gallery did not make a sound. That silence was not emptiness. That silence was weight. It pressed down on the room. I watched Delia sign the words to Mirabel. I watched Mirabel's face process each phrase. When Delia signed the words, "These people never have money to fight," something moved through Mirabel's expression that I will not pretend I fully understood. It was grief, but it was also recognition. The kind that says, "I knew it. I already knew that's what you thought of me." Theodore Fink stood up and said the messages were taken out of context. I told him to sit down. He sat down. Preston shifted in his seat for the first time. I noticed. His posture changed from loose to tight. Good. He was starting to understand where he was. I told him I had one more item. The third piece of evidence was a recorded statement from a witness, a retired librarian named Constance Beaumont, 67 years old, who had been standing outside the Glenwood Public Library when the accident occurred. She had been waiting for her ride. She had seen everything. In her recorded statement, she said she watched Preston Aldwell get out of his car, look at Mirabel on the ground for approximately 4 seconds, and then say out loud, to no one in particular, "She should have been paying attention." And then he walked to the sidewalk and made a phone call. She should have been paying attention. Mirabel was deaf. She crossed at a marked crosswalk on a green pedestrian signal, and the man who hit her said she should have been paying attention. I set down the paper. I took off my glasses. I looked at Preston Aldwell. And then Preston Aldwell did something I was not prepared for. He leaned toward his lawyer. He spoke in a voice just loud enough for the front of the room to hear. He said, "Can we move this along? The interpreter is slowing everything down. I don't have time to wait for someone who can't even talk right. Can we just skip her and move on? I've got a lunch reservation at 1. 10 seconds. That is how long the room was silent. 10 seconds where nobody moved, nobody breathed. The bailiff, a man named Officer Gerald Sumner, who has stood in my courtroom for over a decade and seen nearly everything, turned his head and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. A woman in the third row of the gallery put her hand over her mouth. Someone behind her whispered, "Oh my God." Mirabel did not hear the words, but she saw the reaction. She looked at Delia. Delia, with a stillness that showed tremendous professionalism, signed the words to her, slowly, carefully, as if she were delivering something fragile and dangerous. Mirabel turned and looked at Preston, and she did not look angry. She looked at him the way you look at something you feel sorry for, the way you look at someone who has no idea how small they just made themselves. I sat very still. I have learned over many years that the moments that matter most are not the loud ones. They are the quiet ones. The moments before you speak, when the room knows something is about to happen and no one wants to interrupt it. Then I spoke. I said, "Mr. Aldwell, look at me." He turned, slowly. His confidence had cracks in it now, real ones. I said, "You just said, in this courtroom, in front of this gallery, in front of this woman, that her interpreter is slowing things down, that she can't talk right, that you'd like to skip her. Mr. Aldwell, do you understand where you are?" He started to answer. I kept talking. I said, "This is not a waiting room. This is not an inconvenience between your morning and your afternoon. This is a court of law. And that woman sitting across from you is not an obstacle. She is a person. She is a human being. She is a woman who spent 14 years helping children learn. She is a woman who was crossing a street legally, on a green light, carrying books for her students, when you decided your schedule was more important than the law." I paused, let it settle. I said, Mr. Aldwell, you wrote in a text message that these people never have money to fight. Let me ask you something. What people? What people were you referring to? People who cross streets? People who work in schools? People who communicate differently than you do? What people, Mr. Aldwell? He did not answer. I said, "You also wrote that these things vanish. You believed this would vanish because you had the right lawyer, and she did not have the right resources. You factored in her disadvantage. You counted on it. You planned around her poverty the way some people plan around the weather." The room was so quiet, I could hear the air system running overhead. I turned slightly toward Mirabel. Delia was signing everything. Mirabel's eyes were steady on me. She was not crying. She was listening, really listening. And that steadiness, that quiet dignity she had carried into my courtroom despite everything, told me more about her character than any document ever could. I turned back to Preston. I said, "Mr. Aldwell, you are 26 years old. You have resources. You have opportunities. You have a lawyer who I'm sure is very expensive. And I want you to understand something. None of that makes you more important than her, not one bit of it. This courtroom does not rank human beings by income. It does not rank them by how they communicate. In here, she is equal to you. And today, in here, she is actually far above you because she came in here with her head up and her integrity intact. And you have spent this morning dismantling yours piece by piece." I said, "Mr. Aldwell, the law is not a tool for people with money to use against people without it. It is not a game that the well-connected always win. Not in this courtroom. Not on my watch. I want you to hear something right now. Drop a like on this video if you truly believe, that a person's worth has nothing to do with how much money they have or how they speak, or whether their words come from their mouth or their hands. Because this next part, the sentencing, is exactly what justice looks like when it refuses to blink. I announce the sentencing in clear terms. First, the financial penalty. Preston Aldwell would pay a fine of $4,200. This amount was broken down as follows: $1,000 as the base fine for reckless vehicle operation, $800 for running a red light causing injury, $1,400 in direct restitution, meaning payment back to Mirabel, covering her hospital copay, her lost wages across 4 days of missed work, her $210 physical therapy payment, and her transportation costs to and from all medical appointments, and $1,000 paid into the Providence Community Accessibility Fund, a fund that helps low-income residents with disabilities access legal and medical services. I wanted Preston's money to directly build the kind of support that he had assumed Mirabel didn't have. Second, his driver's license would be suspended for 90 days. During those 90 days, he could apply for a restricted license allowing travel to and from work only, no exceptions. Any violation of that restriction would result in an immediate extension to 1 full year. Third, community service, 120 hours. I did not assign him to a general program. I assigned him specifically to the Riverside Community Learning Center, where Mirabel worked. He would serve as a general aide under supervision of the center director. He would spend those hours in the same building where Mirabel spent her days. He would see every single day, he reported, what work looked like when it came without a trust fund underneath it. He would arrive at 8 in the morning. He would stay until 2 in the afternoon. He would report every Saturday and Sunday for 15 weeks. He was required to take a certified course in disability awareness and communication accessibility. The course was 8 hours, completed within 30 days, with a certificate submitted to my court. He would write a handwritten letter of apology to Mirabel Osei, not typed, not dictated to his lawyer, handwritten in his own words, and submitted to my clerk for review before it was delivered. If that letter contained legal language, deflection, or anything resembling an excuse, he would write it again. And because of what he said in this courtroom about the interpreter, about not having time to wait for someone who, in his words, could not talk right, I added one more condition. He would record a 60-second public statement, filmed in this courtroom, acknowledging the importance of accessibility and the dignity of all forms of communication. That recording would be submitted to the Providence Municipal Court Public Awareness Archive. He would not be given a script. He would find those words on his own. On the matter of contempt of court, his behavior and comments during these proceedings were formally logged. I did not send him to holding, but I want to be clear. I came close. Officer Sumner was already watching him. If Preston Aldwell appeared before me again, on any matter, under any circumstances, with even a fraction of the attitude he brought into my courtroom that morning, the outcome would be dramatically different. I gave him 60 days to begin all conditions. Non-compliance would trigger an immediate hearing. Preston Aldwell left my courtroom that afternoon, looking significantly smaller than he had when he arrived. Mirabel stayed for a moment after the session ended. Through Delia, she asked if she could say something to me. I said, of course. She signed, and Delia spoke the words. "Thank you for not skipping me." I had to take a breath before I responded. 4 weeks later, I received a report from the Riverside Community Learning Center. Preston Aldwell had shown up on his first Saturday. He had been quiet, uncertain, a little awkward. The center director, a woman named Patricia Vong, said he had helped set up chairs for a parent meeting and organized a storage closet that had needed attention for months. He had not complained once. The following Saturday, he came back, and the Saturday after that. On his third week, one of the students, a 9-year-old boy who was learning basic sign language as part of the center's inclusion program, had tried to show Preston a sign. Preston had watched carefully, then tried to copy it. The boy had laughed and corrected him gently, and Preston, according to Patricia Vong, had laughed too. A real laugh, not the polished, performative kind he had worn in my courtroom, a real one. I do not know if Preston Aldwell will become a better man. I am a judge, not a prophet. I cannot guarantee transformation, but I can create the conditions where it becomes possible. When I go home at night and I sit in the quiet, I think about what this work really is. It is not about punishing people, though sometimes punishment is necessary. It is not about winning or losing. It is about something much simpler and much harder. It is about making people see each other, really see each other, past the money, past the labels, past the assumptions, past the cruelty that fear and entitlement build up in a person over years. Mirabel Osei came into my courtroom that morning carrying books she had borrowed for children who needed them. She came in with a broken wrist and a bandage above her eye and a calm in her face that most people twice her age have never managed to find. She communicated with her hands, and every single word she said mattered. Preston Aldwell came in with a designer suit and a lunch reservation and a belief that some people could be skipped. He left knowing better, and that is what this bench is for. Justice does not ask you how you speak. It does not ask how much you earn. It does not check your calendar or your reservation. It asks only one question. Did you treat the person across from you as a human being? And if the answer is no, then I am here. I will always be here, and we will not be skipping anyone.